and we're going to go ahead and get started with our special guest. Her name is Briahna Joy Gray. Of course, you are familiar with her. She is Bernie Sanders' former press secretary, and she is the host of Bad Faith Podcast. Let's go ahead and bring her in. Welcome back, Bree.
Thanks for having me, Sabby. It's always such a pleasure to be with you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I feel like I've now been over this hill for a million years. But thank you. I can't believe it's only been about a month.
You have now officially joined the 40 Club. So welcome. Welcome to the club.
Thanks, Sabby. Do you have any advice for me?
I was just saying, one of the things I will say this, one of the things I found out when I entered the 40 Club, like just as a woman, is that apparently like cardio doesn't work the way that it used to. So that's why. And a lot of people ask like, why is Sabby lifting all these weights? Because like things change, like your body changes, right? So it's like I had to start weightlifting, and it was weird. It was like running and like just like doing the treadmill or the elliptical. It didn't work for me the way that it used to. So that's when I had to introduce strength training. So that's the only thing.
Yeah, well, that's what they say. I mean, I'm sitting here schwitzing a little because I just got back from a 5K run myself. But I think that you're right. I mean, all the research that says that longevity is for everyone is rooted in your bottom strength, like your leg muscle strength, like doing squats and all of those kinds of things. But I've been actually doing a lot more weight training these last few weeks because I had a little bit of a knee injury from overuse. And I've been trying to strengthen my legs for that reason. So you're preaching to the choir. I'm 100% on board with the strength training. Also, this is my little peccadillo. As you are well aware, Sabby, there's a lot of like chatter about the next Joe Rogan of the left and blah, blah, blah. And obviously there's a lot of excitement around Hassan Piker because he weightlifts and he's appealing to men in all these ways. But I would just like to shout out Rania Khalek, who is also a beast in the gym, who I think has some like academic background in, what's the name of the degree? Like fitness. I don't know exactly what. And if you follow her on social media, you see that she's like incredibly athletic. And I just think it's really interesting that there's no female contenders for Joe Rogan of the left, given that she's literally a professional.
Wow. I didn't know that about her, but no, Rania I can tell she's fit.
Yeah.
I can tell.
She really is.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So we have so much to get into because like, I know you and I both have been paying close attention to what's happening with the media and of course, some of the censorship around Charlie Kirk's death. And I don't know about you, but in my lifetime, I have just never seen this type of response around someone's death where the president comes in and starts to say what you can or cannot say, punishing people for speech that he disagrees with. To me, it's just really bizarre. Of course, Benjamin Netanyahu chiming in here to care so much about an American podcaster is very weird to me. And all of these things that are coming out now about it seems like the path that he may have been headed down. But you actually did meet Charlie Kirk. You debated him. I remember when this debate happened. What do you think? How would you describe his persona? Like, what was he like in person when you sat down and talked to him?
So as much as I can remember, because this was about 3 years ago, I didn't have much off-camera conversation with him. TPUSA is an industry. It's a corporation in and of itself. And I remember being struck by the resources they had. They flew me out to Arizona. I remember being struck by the infrastructure they had. I mean, I think at that time, I might have just started working at the Hill. And regardless, in retrospect, their makeup team, the size of the studio, all of their resources, like really eclipse what we had at the Hill. And I remember spending a lot more time talking to his makeup artist, for instance, who was very good, than Charlie Kirk. I remember that his team had represented this as a cordial debate. And just, I think, before I recorded my debate with Charlie, Ben Burgess had done one with him. So I looked and listened to that as a sort of blueprint for how it was likely going to go with me, including in terms of tone. My experience was not that it was similar to that. And if you watch the video, you'll see that Charlie came out of the gate swinging with incredibly bad faith attacks, logical fallacies, ad hominem, like just all over the place. And if you read the comment section of his own video, his own supporters are like, hey, that wasn't appropriate. Like, why did you come out swinging like that? You were so combative. And then you accused her of being combative. And it felt like he was trying to bait me, frankly, into responding in kind and playing into what we are both familiar of as a kind of angry Black woman trope. And after I resisted that, the interview calmed down after about 20 or 30 minutes. And we were, and we were able to have a more appropriate conversation. But I remember really feeling like this is a bait and switch. Like, you assured me that this wasn't, that you wanted to have a quote unquote dialogue, that this wasn't going to be an attack or a pile-on. And it was very much not that. So when I've seen other people in this space, people, who I like and respect, but who have tried to hold out their personal interactions with Charlie as evidence that he was a person of value in the space who communicated in ways that we should admire, I just have to offer up my own personal experience, which normally I wouldn't trot out. But for all of the people trying to canonize Kirk, especially on the left, I probably wouldn't say much about him at all. But I felt, as someone who is on the left and who did meet Charlie, is one of the few people who met Charlie, who is of one of the groups that he had open disdain for as a Black person and as a woman, my experience with him was not at all that he was generous and kind. It was quite the opposite, that I felt like he was intentionally trying to set me up and only back down because he was like kind of intellectually unable to pin me the way that he assumed he would be able to.
Yeah, I think it's important that people hear different sides about this. I mean, obviously, I think everyone has heard Candace's experience with this because she was also like really close to him. They're friends. But I thought that it was really important that people do hear the other perspective. In fact, I have a clip here from that debate that I do want to, this topic here about redlining. This one got me heated. This one really made me heated. I have to bring this in here because I think people need to see this because when you do hear this type of energy on the right, where people will say, well, we're all equal. Like Tucker Carlson says this, Charlie Kirk said that too, we're all equal. I think people need to understand where they're really trying to take that. We all should be equal, but we're not all treated, equally. And a great example of that is this redlining part here. I want to play a little bit of this.
The GI Bill gave low interest loans to people who had served in the war. Right? And those loans were issued they were federally backed loans. So the banks would issue to people at a low interest rate so that they could buy homes and generate what we now understand to be the basis of middle class wealth in this country. What ended up happening was the process of redlining was that banks said, oh, we're only going to issue loans for you to buy in certain neighborhoods.
Right, Black banks.
All banks.
Right. So why did Charlie, Black banks do that?
The overwhelming majority of issuers in this country.
No, you got to answer the question. Why did Black banks do that?
I will answer your question. But what I'm talking about is the overwhelming majority of issuers, just like today, even more so back then, the overwhelming majority of issuers were white-owned banks. And those banks redlined communities where they said, we will not issue to people who live in these communities. Now, what ended up happening, what that meant for Black people, was because of what's called a restrictive covenant, which meant that in the law, in the covenant that attached to the land for a lease, many of them precluded Black people from buying in those neighborhoods. So basically what happened was banks would only lend to people and give those low interest loans to people who were allowed to live in white neighborhoods, which meant that systemically, Black people weren't able to take advantage of that same low interest loan program that enabled so many white people who ordinarily would not have been able to afford a house because they fought and served in our wars to do so. Now, how many Black banks are in America, and how many Black banks were in America in the 1960s,
if there's even one example,
Charlie?
That's the question.
No, because
blacks were discriminating against themselves, and whites were being discriminated more than Asian Americans.
This is what's so fascinating.
Let me answer this question. Why was
did
Black?
You want me to answer your question about?
Well,
Black
you're not. You're dodging and you're dancing.
No, I'm happy to.
Very bluntly.
Let the record reflect that I'm happy to answer your question about Black boners. My point is that
answer the question.
before we started this conversation, Charlie, you assured me that it would not be pugilistic
It's
in
not.
nature.
I'm asking you to answer a
And
question, and you're not doing that.
the question is, how many Black banks are in America at the time issuing those kinds of loans? Charlie, at the end of the day,
So you're not answering. I got it. That's fine. No, it's okay.
Charlie,
So
answer my question.
Okay, so people can see where this was going, right? I think what I found disturbing about this part of the conversation is that my parents grew up in a red line neighborhood. My grandparents, no matter how much money they made, they were never able to get those loans from the banks to get out of those communities. And the way that my parents got out was when my dad joined the military. That's how my parents were able to get out of poverty. And I think that the framing, the way it was framed here, how many Black banks, the Black banks did this too. The reality, to the point that you were saying, is that most of the banks at that point in time that were around were white owned banks, and they were the ones that were issuing those home loans. And so this one really got my blood boiling, because another part of this conversation that is mentioned is that, well, people who had higher income, they would be able to get the loans. That is false. And that's the other thing, is that when those neighborhoods were redlined, regardless of the household income, the banks were still not going to lend to those people. And those were Black neighborhoods. And so I think that a lot of people don't understand that, especially if they don't have that experience or they're just not knowledgeable about it. But I felt like the straw man, the argument that he was trying to make there in particular, was that, well, there were Black banks too, so that means it was happening to everybody, and Black banks also discriminated against.
It's so absurd, Sabby. It's so absurd that it's almost beneath both of us for even having to have the conversation. The idea, where does the wealth in banks come from? He's making some claim that in a miserated community, fresh out of slavery and Jim Crow, should have magical financing. Does he think that if you just build a building and write the word bank on the front, that suddenly has the capacity to lend infinitely? But the money falls out of the sky if you hang a sign that says bank and you're a Black person? It's absurd. It's beyond absurd. And half the stuff that he said was I believe to be made up. You can't necessarily say so in the moment, but the idea that black banks, to the extent that there were 3 in the country, because how many are there even now? God knows how many there were in 1950. But the Black banks were somehow discriminated against Black people. What if it's a Black bank? What does that even mean? What does that mean? It's a Black bank. Okay, so you're saying there's a bank owned by Black people that only lends to white people? Does that make sense to you, Charlie? Does that sound like a thing that existed? And there's white people that like to go to be serviced by that Black bank that is probably not funded very much, because who's putting the money into the Black bank? It's funded by Black people that only serves white. What are you even saying? Like, it doesn't make sense. And this is the kind of Gish Gallop BS that his debates that are being heralded by the Ezra Kleins of the world are chock full of. And here's another thing, another part of the interview. He accuses me of being obsessed with race. Yeah. Now, I want to be so clear. He should be having this conversation with any number of scholars who are experts on redlining, which I am not. I am just a Black person. And he made the choice to solicit as a debate partner a random Black person, one who frankly predominantly focuses on socioeconomic issues, populist economic policies coming hot off the Bernie campaign in particular, who has the average amount of knowledge about institutional racism as someone who just went to college and took classes, right? And then he starts to accuse me of being obsessed with race. And I had to say, Charlie, with all due respect, you could have been sitting there arguing with an expert if he actually wanted to know the nitty-gritty details. But he never does that. He wants to interview an 18-year-old. He wants to interview people who are not issue area experts. He messed up with me because I'm smarter than the average bear. But at the end of the day, he has no interest in actually learning anything or finding with a real expert. What he wants is to get a Black person across from him who he can demonize as being obsessed with Black issues and obsessed with race and unable to defend positions about the existence of white supremacy and anti-Black racism and the way it manifests in contemporary America. And it's all a game. It's all a giant setup. And that is part of why it's so frustrating to see people not just saying, I'm sad a man was killed or I'm sad a father was killed. That's your right. But to go so far as to credit the substance of his politics, the value of his rhetorical skill, or what it was able to quote unquote build, when what he built was largely a consequence of having been recruited as an 18-year-old by a bunch of right-wing billionaires to evangelize on college campuses, not because he was good, smart, or correct, but because he shared an economic agenda that advances that of the very, very rich.
I keep trying to explain to people there are strings that are attached to that money. I think, you and I know about this, but there are strings that are attached. And you're right. He was incredibly young. What do you make of this? Because I feel like people really get this wrong sometimes with the whole systemic issue. This is part of the reason why I made that documentary, and which should be out in early November, is because I think that people really just don't understand, like to the point that you were explaining there, that they redlined the neighborhood. So they were not going to lend to you. So you could not move into the suburban communities. I'm not sure if you ever read Michelle Obama's book, Becoming.
I never did.
She talked about this too. And I know, look, I got my opinion of the Obamas, but she talked about this, like how their neighborhood in the South Side of Chicago changed due to the redlining and how white flight happened. And she showed pictures of the neighborhood changing over the years once white flight took place and all that type of stuff. But I think that like, this is the part that like people don't really understand. Like that's something that we as people just had no control over, them redlining neighborhoods. That there was no control that we had there. And so ultimately it does shut people out. It locks people out, of wealth. But I think one thing that is disturbing to me is like when I see these debates and there's constant interruption. I remember watching that when it first premiered. And I was like, how is she going to make her point if he keeps interrupting? Right. So it almost feels like that's the goal, is to not get the point out.
Absolutely. And to make you, by constantly interrupting you and then accusing you of interrupting them, they often will cut stuff up to also make it seem as though you're not articulate, like you're stuttering and unable to get your point out. One of the last times I went on Piers Morgan, they did this. Fun, like this is an announcement to everyone. If for any reason you find yourself going on Piers Morgan and they offer to send a car, like they have these mobile studios that they'll send to your house, don't do it. Don't take it. Because I was on a delay. I don't know if it was purposeful or not, but when I did the mobile car, I was on a delay. And so every time I would go to speak, I would cut someone off because I didn't hear that the conversation had already moved. All I heard was a pause in the conversation and I would start to speak. And then when they aired the episode, they cut it so that it looked like they asked me a question and then there was a long delay and it looked like I was struggling to answer, but I was just waiting to hear the end of the question, right? So the next time I was on, I declined as an experiment the car, did it from my home studio, and the delay was gone. Again, don't know if it was purposeful, but what was purposeful was their choice to cut it up and pretend as though the delay was a consequence of, mental slowness as opposed to their own technical issues. So this is the kind of trick that they like to play. And this is what Charlie Kirk was playing out in this game. I think that where he miscalculated in this interview was that it's a long form one-on-one interview. So unlike Piers Morgan, where it's an hour long, but there are 5 or so panelists and you're at Piers's whims in terms of when he calls on you or what you get to respond to or what you get to say. Here, he couldn't just filibuster. Eventually he has to stop talking and there's room for the other person to talk. And that's why I think things started to cool down eventually at about the 30-minute mark. And I was able to say my piece in a way that was persuasive, I think unexpectedly to Charlie Kirk, to both him and to the audience. And you'll remember if you go back and you watch this, I just watched it recently. I didn't watch it when it came out because frankly, I was so anxious and I was so frustrated walking out of there that day that I didn't watch it until he was killed recently. At about within 15 or 20 minutes, he acknowledges that systemic racism does exist, which is the whole point of the debate. And then it was like, okay, as far as I was concerned, it was over and the temperature could be turned down. I don't think he even really understood that that's what had just happened. But I was like, okay, so you understand that we got through defining what it means for something to be systemic. We got through what it means for something to be unequal. And then he just conceded it. I was like, okay. What are we gonna do with the next 45 minutes?
Yeah, it's one of those things that is I'm asking questions about this as well. I think you lost your camera.
Sorry. My bad. Sorry, I banged the table. Unplugged my thing. Sorry.
I have a question about this as well. What do you make of the Charlie's friends? What do you make of Candace, Tucker, Megan, all coming out now saying that he was receiving pressure from donors that were donating to Turning Point USA, that he was starting to question Israel? I did see the interview where he was on PBD podcast and he was asking about what really happened on October 7th and why did the IDF stand down. I did see that one. What do you make of all this? Do you think that he was starting to ask too many questions where Israel is concerned and the donors are concerned? Do you think he was starting to make a change?
We know he was starting to ask questions because he was asking them on air, right? There was videos of him starting to, equivocate or talk about pressure. So, I mean, we know that happened. The question is whether or not there was some suspicious circumstances around his death. Obviously, the reporting that's been done by Max Blumenthal over at the Gray Zone is interesting, and the fact that there's so many people close to Charlie, both those who are very skeptical of Israel and Zionism, like Candace Owens, and those who are proud Zionists, like Megyn Kelly, are all sort of talking about his late life concerns and, dabbling in alternate causes of his death. I haven't, done a deep dive into this yet. I'm trying to have Max Blumenthal on the show next week to unpack it and what apparently some new reporting that he has on this. But you know what the evidence is. The evidence is some combination of Charlie Kirk expressing a change of heart, kind of Tucker style, Candace style evolution, expressing pressure from his own organization. And the fact that there seemed to be some coordination between Netanyahu's condolence posts and Trump's condolence posts in terms of the timing. The fact that Netanyahu felt the need to put out I didn't kill Charlie Kirk video, which definitely has thou doth protest too much vibes. And the fact of them honoring Charlie Kirk in Israel and naming a street after him or some such thing. And then, of course, people haven't really noted this as one of the bits of evidence, but I was thinking about this earlier today. How quickly conservatives rushed to pin this on a leftist shooter when there was no evidence of anything. And when most of these kinds of shooters do tend to be conservative, just like the school shooter the same day around the same time, suggested, it does kind of suggest a forethought, like to go so confidently, this was the other side, this was the other team. You could interpret that as evidence that they knew the outcome because it was a sort of a planted outcome. And of course, people have also been questioning the integrity of the text messages between the shooter and his roommate / partner. So that's the evidence. That's the evidence. I don't have any special knowledge of anything. I'm really interested to hear more from Max about this, but I certainly understand why people would have some skepticism given the long history of Israel doing hits and assassinating people all over the world. Sorry, it's just true.
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same basket there, the same boat, just kind of lining up all the dots here. It's just very bizarre to me. And then also the censorship issue. I also find this to be kind of strange. Trump is going through he's going to such extremes to silence people because of what they say. And I told people I don't really think this is about Charlie Kirk. I really think this is about more of a bigger issue. I see this as, I wouldn't be surprised if Netanyahu has his hand in this a little bit. It's like they have been saying bad things about Israel, so you need to do something about the speech. I wouldn't be surprised if that was all connected. But I also find it very interesting that this was a time where you had people on the left and some on the right, including some politicians like MTG, Thomas Massey, and podcasters like Candace and Tucker Carlson, coming out saying, no more money going to Israel. There's a genocide happening in Gaza. We cannot continue to support them, etc. So there was that opportunity where you have people on the left and the right coming together, at least on that particular issue. And then all of a sudden this happens and they say, well, it's a leftist who did it. So everybody be mad at the lefties and the crazy left radicals. And just like that, like clockwork. It seemed like Marjorie Taylor Greene, she posted, I was wrong. We can't work with the left. Thomas Massey posted it on X. We can't work with the left. And everything just seemed to fall into plan.
Interesting. I hadn't seen those posts from Marjorie Taylor Greene and Massey. Have they said that they were going to change their position on Israel, or just that they're going to change their position about whether or not they can work with it? I mean, because what does that even mean at the end of the day? If there's if there's an option to vote for more Israel funding and they don't want to support it, and Ro doesn't want to support it, then they're with the left whether they want it or not. Do you know what I mean?
Right. I mean, that's the thing. They didn't say they would change in their position on Israel, but just that they're like, we can't work with the left because they're radical. And I'm like, but you're working with like Ro right now. You are working with some people on the left, because it was primarily a lot of leftists that were part of the pro-Palestinian movement. So I think, but I feel like this is exactly what the elites want. This is what the billionaires want. This is what Israel wants. They're like, we have to find a way to break them up again. Let's pit them again against each other, left versus right, and just have them focused on that so that they're not focusing on us anymore. That's what it feels like.
It's certainly the case that, this is being used shock doctrine style to be the death knell of any real First Amendment rights in the United States of America. I mean, you opened by saying that it's anomalous to see the country being kind of forced to grieve over Charlie Kirk in this way. And we've never really seen kind of forced consensus on death like this. And I agree with you, except the one exception to that is, October 7th. And the hearings where random Zionist students are allowed to come and testify that a teacher said a mean thing to them. Meanwhile, a 6-year-old's being stabbed to death by someone who was radicalized by Fox News against Palestinians. I mean, the one-sidedness of coverage. I mean, the censorship that's ongoing, attempts at least are ongoing, of Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, apparently for the crime of being Muslim and not being in love with Charlie Kirk. I mean, it started with, first they came for Palestine and Palestine protesters, and I didn't care because I was not Palestinian. Like, here we are. And I understand, and people are rightly frustrated that Jimmy Kimmel seems to be the tipping point for so many liberals, when this has been going on for the better part of 2 years against anybody who has had the temerity to say that they don't like genocide, or what are they saying now? 680,000 people being killed.
Yeah. 680,000. And then I want to get your take on this here that Candace said. I think you knocked your camera, Brie.
Oh, sorry. I have a new, this is my bad. Let me, that's my bad.
This is something that Candace said that I think you guys need to hear.
The chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Brendan Carr, jumped up and he criticized Jimmy Kimmel's remarks. He threatened federal action against ABC affiliates who carried the show. What? Federal action if you carry the Jimmy Kimmel show? Does that seem right to you? Okay. Again, if you're on the right and you cheered this on, do you understand? We never, ever, ever should be applauding federal action when it comes to speech. Okay. We're all losing. We are all losing. You have to wake up. That's what happened. Brendan Carr of the FCC was joining Benny Johnson. And that's what he said, that he absolutely wants to make sure that people are not carrying this show anymore. And that after, one of the mergers that they did, I just see the same people are constantly being empowered. And I want to point that out to you because you have to be more conscious of that. It's like they use our emotions, left versus right, to manipulate all of us. And it's completely wrong. And it's completely crazy.
That's the part that I wanted people to hear. What is your take on that, Brie? I know that we don't agree. You and I don't agree with Candace on most of the issues, but we do agree with her on Israel and Gaza, and I'm assuming also free speech. What do you think about what she just said there about they're using our emotions against us?
I think that despite what Charlie Kirk might think of certain Black women, Candace Owens is one of the smarter people in the space on, in her camp. And it feels like an insane amount of gaslighting when folks who purport to have cared about free speech suddenly are saying, well, it was because the ratings were bad. Or, well, I didn't like Jimmy Kimmel anyway. Like, it's so ridiculous. Also, by the way, Jimmy Kimmel was fully right-coded from the Man Show. Like, the idea that he's some, left hero that we were supposed to love because he was, so left-leaning. Always, no, he and Adam Carolla came from the Man Show. Adam Carolla didn't get the cushy liberal job, so he stayed right-coded and right-leaning, and he has a conservative show. And Jimmy Kimmel went lib because that's what you have to do to have mass appeal, is to not be kind of a misogynist shock jock guy. Okay, fine. But people are doing a lot of this excuse making to cover up from the fact that this is an obvious, explicit encroachment on free speech. I mean, Brennan Carr fully tweeted in response. I'm sure you saw this. Someone had tweeted this was part of 2025, by the way. This was an express part of the plan when Trump were to become president again. And he responded to the tweet with the Jack Nicholson, yes, nodding, evil nodding meme. He openly threatened that if the network didn't play ball, that they were going to not approve this merger. It was an open threat. And so regardless of what you think about any of the parties involved, it should be obvious that if this is the game we're going to play, that conservatives will be incredibly vulnerable to this the next time around. And this is infinitely more egregious than whatever pressures were being put on Twitter or Facebook or other social media companies behind the scenes by Biden during the Biden era. And to be someone who purported to care about that, and who spent the whole last 3 years talking about that and the Twitter files, and to remain silent and do this excuse making dance when you have the head of the FCC making open threats as to what the ideological tenor of a show needs to be in order to allow a merger that will have positive financial implications for a company to go through. I mean, to the extent that people and the independent journalists have credentials, they need to be stripped because you just have no credibility whatsoever. And so I really applaud Candace Owens for being willing to take hard positions. Sometimes she takes some hard positions that really didn't need to be taken. but when she's right. Let her cook.
Yeah. I think more people need to hear that. So I'm glad that someone on the right is saying that. And Donald Trump was called out about free speech recently. And the way he's responding to this is just egregious.
I want to sell this free speech question because you've said that you restored free speech in America.
Yeah.
Is that free speech including for people who are harshly critical of you, for your political opponents, for people who say things you don't like?
I become immune to it.
Unfairly?
I become immune to it. There's never been a person that's had more unfair publicity than me, and that's why your network paid me $15 million or $16 million, I believe, to be exact, George Slopadopoulos, and that's why CBS paid me a lot of money too. And that's why I sued the New York Times 2 days ago for a lot of money. Because I'm winning. I mean, I'm winning the cases. And the reason I'm winning is because you're guilty, John. You're guilty. ABC is a terrible network, a very unfair network, and you should be ashamed of yourself. NBC is equally bad. I don't know who's worse. I think they're equally bad. And, for you to stand there and act so innocent and ask me a question like that. But look, you paid a big price because you were dishonest, John. The reason I won that lawsuit was because you were dishonest. You were proven to be dishonest. And so you can't sit back and just say, oh, well, what do you think? Like you're some wonderful person. You're not a wonderful person. Frankly, you're a terrible reporter. You know it, and so do I. Okay.
So that didn't really answer the question there about speech, about free speech. And I also find it very interesting that some of the same people, and you've probably seen this, Gree, some of the same conservative accounts that are on Twitter that were exclaiming, free speech under Biden's administration are just going along just fine with what Trump is doing. And I'm like, and with some of us, when we said we were pro free speech, we meant for everybody, not just for the issues that we are really passionate about.
Yeah. I mean, first of all,
I have to say, George Slopadopoulos was hilarious. I hate that this man is still making me laugh. What can I say? Gemini is always going to put a smile on my face. That being said, of course, this is craven and insane. And the only reason I think Trump gets away with taking this posture is that he knows the Democrats are spineless and they could be in office tomorrow and they would never play the same game. They would never take away the broadcast licenses from Fox News if they didn't, subscribe to their political ideology. They would never do this. And so of course he could, at a certain point, why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't the Republicans, just run the ball? What's stopping them?
That question right there. The Democratic Party doesn't take the gloves off.
Never. They would never. There's a Democrat somewhere sitting in Washington shaking their head going, wow, that what a disgrace that news conference is. But if we're in power, we would never be like that. And patting themselves in the back. Like, honey, you might never be in power again. And this is exactly why. There's no resistance party. Look, do I wish that Democrats could model good behavior and that would compel Republicans to have good behavior? Yes. I wish that were how the world worked. But the problem is Democrats don't even do things that are legal and appropriate when they have power. So the whole conversation during the Biden trifecta was that we can't do anything because we don't have a supermajority, but also we don't want to get rid of the filibuster. Okay, so then you spent two years of the trifecta explaining why you couldn't get things done, and the next 2 years explaining now that you really couldn't get things done because you didn't have the trifecta anymore. And then you wonder why people don't see the benefit in voting for a Democrat and don't see that you had anything on offer and why you should vote for you again. All you did was restart my student loan payments. Nope. That's the lived real world effect. Meanwhile, Biden couldn't figure out how to cancel anybody's student debt. Donald Trump went ahead and said, if you join ICE, I'll give you $50,000 to pay down your student debt. 50. What happened to all those arguments about the undeservedness of student debtors and how you had to pay your bills back? Apparently, everyone needs to pay what they owe unless you go and work for the Gestapo. And Democrats were afraid of their shadow. Biden couldn't even, not that Biden, I don't think he sincerely wanted to cancel student debt, but even if he had wanted to, he couldn't even sell the policy because he had half the party arguing against it half the time. Nancy Pelosi was arguing against the policy. The blue dogs of the party were saying it was a bad idea. And now you see what's going on with the Ezra Klein again. What does Charlemagne call him? Donkey of the week. Here comes Charlemagne. He's trying to make sure no one else ever wins the prize, but these back-to-back hits. Charlemagne is not out here talking about, Charlemagne. Ezra Klein is out here talking about how we have to, if we want to grow the tent, we have to be willing to support anti-choice candidates. And he specifically named in states where actually the pro-choice won on the ballot line and on these ballot measures. I mean, it's like these people are actively... Like, you have Republicans being the tastemakers of the Democratic Party and it's like, you can't tell me at a certain point that there's not like a Republican in Ezra Klein's head, like one of those little monsters in Mars Attacks. Like, he's fully just a Republican. It's fully just a Republican Party. It is the Washington Commanders and the Harlem Globetrotters, and the Democrats are there to lose. It's exhausting. Like, I almost don't even want to talk about it anymore. Like, the Democrats are horrible, and it feels like our job at this point is just to make it so clear to voters that there's no, like, the call is coming from inside the house. Like, there's no help coming. You need to divest from this party, and you're wasting your time and energy thinking that anything is good going to happen. They're too busy fighting against Zohran Mamdani,
right?
And Ilhan Omar, than they are fighting against Donald Trump.
Well, here's a perfect example too. This is a big one for people who have not seen this. So the Senate unanimously passed a resolution designating October 14th as National Charlie Kirk Day of Remembrance. Now, the part to pay attention to here is unanimously. That was the Senate. That includes the Democrats. That includes Bernie Sanders too. Yep. So one of the things I pointed out here, for those who are not aware, MLK Day, when they were voting on that was not unanimously passed. I don't know if everyone knows that. And in fact, Dick Cheney was very, very much against MLK having a day in the U.S., which is, I have to say that because Kamala Harris was bragging about getting his support. He was very much against that. And so I said, I just hope everybody remembers this when Democrats come around asking for your vote. Like you can't have it both ways. You can't sit up here and say they're fighting against the Republicans or et cetera, but then they cave to the pressure every time. And then in the House, it's a little bit different. I do understand. I think AOC and a couple others, the squad members, did not vote in support of the Charlie Kirk Day. But what this gentleman here said, his name is Ashai, he said the Democratic Party leadership is whipping votes to honor Charlie Kirk instead of fighting the right's attacks on free speech and rising authoritarianism. No longer surprising, but deeply embarrassing. This is why we lose. So it just, they're not willing to fight. I feel like they do give in to the Republican Party, even on issues that they may not agree with. They still give in, and the Republican Party doesn't do that. They will fight tooth and nail and not give in on those issues. And to me, it's crazy. We have watched this party over the years move further and further to the right.
Do you remember when Joe Biden promised to pass a George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which itself was an anemic bill that wasn't really going to get through the problem, but he promised to do it by the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death, which would have been, a few months after he was inaugurated in 2021. Do you remember what happened? It didn't go anywhere at all. And in fact, when I was watching with a keen eye when that anniversary date rolled around, and they trotted out Al Sharpton on Twitter to post, it's better that it's done well than that it be rushed. So yeah, like let's let Joe Biden, keep working on it. So it's like a good bill and not a rushed bill. It is 4 years later now. Mm-hmm. And George Floyd, I believe his birthday is also October 14th. Now, on his birthday, we get Charlie Kirk's Remembrance Day, a man who spent much of his career arguing that George Floyd died of a fentanyl overdose and mocking his family and his children and his legacy. And now, most unanimously in the House, in the Senate, and many Democrats in the House have voted to honor that man on George Floyd's birthday. That's your resistance party, kids.
Don't forget Chuck Schumer also kneeled in kente cloth, and he's supporting that. I mean, it's just laughable at this point in time.
I'd like to see them try that today. I think back then they were already solidly in their 70s. I want to know what the what do you call it, osteopathic bills were after that stunt, and what would happen if they tried to do it again today. I mean, it's absurd. It's an absurd joke of a party. I'm sorry, Sabby, I don't know if you're frustrated by this, but like I'm kind of at. Can you tell? I'm at my zenith. Like I cannot. I feel like I've been very patient over the years, trying to slowly walk people into the realization the Democratic Party, there was no insider strategy that was going to work. For me, the last chance that there could be a chance to infiltrate from within was the Bernie 2020 campaign. And even that was a long shot. And the second that man dropped out of the race, I was done. That was it. For me. I was done with Democrats the second Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden. But I understood that other people didn't have the same basis of experience or the same perspective that I did. And I was patient. I patiently waited to see what Joe Biden was going to do with his presidency, with the COVID mandate that he had. Yep. I waited to see what he was going to do with those tiers of the trifecta. I waited to see what the squad was going to do with Force the Vote. I waited to see what they were going to do with Build Back Better and the bifurcation. I waited to see what they were going to do with the $15 minimum wage. I waited patiently and said, oh, any day now I might be proven wrong. I watched them vote to break the railroad strike. Everybody but Rashida Tlaib. I watched and I waited. And then I saw Gaza. And I'm grateful. I mean, that's a weird way to say it, but I am, I guess, heartened in some way that at least a full-on genocide was a red line for some folks on the left, but it wasn't for others. And most of our online community, as you can remember, told everybody to get in line and vote for genocide. To what end? And they felt like heroes about it, by the way. There's a world where they could have said 6 months, a year in advance, I will not vote for a genocidal candidate, and had some opportunity to actually change the outcome, change the candidate, change the position on the issue. But by pledging their fealty, they guaranteed there would be no change in position from the Democratic Party and literally enabled the genocide. And now we're still waiting for people to understand what the dynamics are here, that we are living in the fascist world that Democrats helped build. Democrats. And expecting them to undo their own handiwork is psychotic. It's crazy. It's not going to happen.
It's very alarming, especially now, which I'll get into the story later on the show. But AOC, it's apparently is going to run for either the Senate seat, Chuck Schumer's seat, or for president for 2028. And it's just, I don't know. I one or two things is going to happen. Either she's going to capitulate to Democrat leadership, which we've already seen her do throughout her career. But I see her even capitulating even more and bending on some issues that she hasn't bent on just yet, so that she can get through the nomination. She can get that Dem nomination that Bernie couldn't get because of the super delegates. I mean, that's the reality with president. Like in the Democratic Party, you have to get the super delegates, right? So either that, or she's not going to become the nominee and is going to tell you to vote for the Democrat candidate that is taking the billionaire money and is corporate. Either way, I just don't see that. I feel like the people who were sent into the party to create change don't really want to change the system. I feel like they just want reforms.
This is what like this has been so frustrating in talking about like Zoran too, for instance, because unlike AOC, like I he hasn't had an opportunity to point me 3 ways till Sunday, right? So like there have been, to be so clear, the Al Sharpton interview, the throwing of the defund the police under the bus, like all of that stuff, and we can get into that if you want. But in terms of having, the many, many years of walking back that AOC has demonstrated, he's not there. And he has been much more strident and stuck to his guns about some of this stuff in a way that AOC never really did. But it doesn't matter, because it's not about what's in AOC's heart, and it's not what's in Zoran's heart and what he really believes, or any of that. To be allowed within the party, you have to bend the knee. That's the condition of it. And some people decide it's worth it because they think they can do something with the position inside. And that's clearly AOC's position. AOC, look, I don't think it comes from like a malevolent place. I think she got into Congress and she has real constituents, and she's from a working class district, and she sees families come in and she's able to get some money to help bury their families during COVID or give them backpacks with school utensils at the beginning of the school year, school supplies at the beginning of the year. And that feels tangible and real. And, it is tangible and real. And she's like, well, I could blow it all up to make someone on the internet happy, but I would rather keep doing what I can on the inside. And it's that kind of short-term thinking that makes her, I think, very comfortable sleeping at night. That's one way to look at the world. Another way to look at the world is to say there are a handful of us in Congress who, depending on the Constitution of Congress, constitute a voting bloc that's necessary for the Democrats to pass any kind of agenda. And we should use this power to expose the Democratic Party for what it is. Why aren't you talking about Medicare for all in a pandemic? Why aren't you talking about Medicare for all always as you face a rise of fascism and an existential crisis, an electoral crisis, and it has 88% popularity within the Democratic Party, and people are poor? We're all talking about the cost of groceries, and grocery costs are high, but the average American family pays upwards of $20,000 a year for health insurance. That's like a number one cost on people's budgets right after their mortgages. So we're allowed to talk about housing costs, sort of. Some of the Democrats are really offering much on that either, but we're allowed to at least allude to high housing costs. I don't even hear people, when they're talking about the cost of living crisis, even mention healthcare, including AOC at this point. And it's my view that they could be doing a lot more good on a longer horizon, perhaps. But I don't think it's ethical, me personally, to be focused on giving somebody school supplies when they're going to go home and not be able to have healthcare when their parent gets sick or if their parent loses their job. And so I understand the argument. I'm not here to say like I don't think anybody's like evil, malevolent, anything like that. But I do think they're very, very wrong-headed. And there's something seductive about being on the inside, and there's something seductive about, you know, getting the pin on your blazer and being able to go on MSNBC and to have a higher paycheck than she's ever had in her life. And, you know, I get it, but that's not supposed to be the reason you got inside, and have yet to see anybody who's been able to resist that temptation. Or you stand your ground and you don't get in office. And I do think I'm not as sanguine about the probability of Zoran becoming mayor as a lot of other people, because I remember India Walton. I'm not saying they're identical scenarios, but I remember India Walton. And if he really means what he says, if he's really going to arrest Netanyahu if he ever steps foot in New York, then there's no way they're going to let him be mayor. There's just no. So, you know, or he retracts and then he gets to be mayor. And maybe we get like a de Blasio level, like good mayor. Like de Blasio is better than the alternative. But let's not kid ourselves about what's happening here. That's my fear. And again, I hope I am proven wrong. I hope he both becomes mayor and like leads the revolution from the mayor's office. Like I would love to be wrong. And I'd love to be wrong about AOC. Is AOC better than Chuck Schumer? Yeah. But also there's the risk that AOC being there and being better than Chuck Schumer validates the integrity of a party that we know is a lost cause. And is that really a gain for us as much as it's a gain for the reputation of the Democratic Party? I don't know. I think it's a tough question.
So really good point. One more point for you, Bree. Have you had the opportunity to have conversation with any of the independent media folks who were a part of Justice Democrats, like getting that going? Like Gene came on the show not too long ago when he was trying to start a different, a populist candidate movement. But have you had the opportunity to talk to Cenk or any of them that were involved in that process since the Biden administration? Anything, and if so, anything that they would change, anything that they would do differently, or do they feel like everything's working out the way it should?
I have not. I did reach out to Kyle Kulinski recently, not that recently, some weeks back. Haven't heard back. I think I talked to Cenk maybe about a year ago, but I think that was in the context of him still calling me a fake leftist or something. I don't think we've really had an opportunity to get into the nitty gritty of things. I spoke to Shroykat Chakrabarti, who was in the mix. He was one of his early staffers, and also Corbin Trent, who was an early AOC staffer. I mostly was talking to Shroykat in the context of his race against Nancy Pelosi. He's challenging her. And whatever you think about him, I know that there's some left critique of him having made a lot of money in tech and maybe being a sort of tech coded. I asked him questions about that. You guys can take from his answers what you take from it on my interview with him. But I think he's better than Pelosi. So that is what it is. I just vengefully am happy he's running against Pelosi. But I asked him a little bit about AOC, and he offered some revealing things about what pressures he thinks AOC is under that have affected her choices in office. And Corbin also was sort of willing to go there a little bit with me, which I appreciated. But in terms of like having conversations about whether they feel like the project has failed or succeeded, I mean, back during Force the Vote, when Kyle came on the show, he was very explicit that the whole point of the squad getting elected, in his view, was to do things like force the vote.
Yeah.
I mean, he said that, 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But they have no control. Like there's no accountability, right? Like I interviewed Antonio Delgado recently. He's Lieutenant Governor of New York, and he's running against Kathy Hochul. And he is kind of framing himself as like the Zoran friendly governor, as compared to Hochul. And I think, frankly, the fact of him running against her is why she finally caved and endorsed Zoran recently. But keep in mind that she hasn't said that she's going to fund Zoran's agenda, right? So I think there's still an argument, again, to the extent that you're participating and you care about the Democratic Party and these things, that he still would be better than Hochul. But regardless, I asked him, I'm like, you're kind of positioning yourself in this way. Like, what accountability do you think that you should have to the left? I asked Omar Fateh about this, who's running for mayor in Minneapolis. Like, you're a DSA candidate. You know, what do you make of ASC and the other squad members having taken some bad votes over time? And to what accountability do you think you owe to DSA? I asked him those questions because otherwise, what's the point, you know, if they don't see themselves as beholden to an ideology or a movement at all? And I don't want to mischaracterize the answer. You can listen to it and make of it what you make of it. But the truth is there is no real mechanism for accountability. And the DSA itself is so unwilling, is so reluctant to cut ties or even like publicly speak out when people err. They did flirt with kicking out Jamal Bowman at one point. But people really gotta, I mean, that was in the context of a genocide and an Israel trip. And like, it was pretty extreme stuff that got them to that point. Can't imagine they'd ever say like, I think you were strategically wrong about something like force the vote or, you know, not speaking out over Schumer's clear machinations over taking the fight to 15 out of the COVID bill or all of the stuff that we know happened over the last 4 years.
Yeah. It's just interesting. I'm always curious because, like I say, like sometimes I wonder like how they really feel, you know, because there's the public response and then there's the things that are said off camera. Like, what the fuck is wrong with these people?
I don't think that like people like Kyle are getting their calls and haven't been for years getting their calls returned by the ASCs of the world. Do you know what I mean? You know, it's got to feel sort of weird to have like found someone literally like, you know, in a bar and put all this money, time, and attention behind them and really believed in them and gotten them to this position and to feel almost immediately like you were shut out. I mean, I don't expect, you know, you're not beholden to someone forever. I mean, she's done stuff on her own and, you know, ultimately I'm not saying her success is anybody's but hers, but I don't know. It raises the question as to why, you know, whether you would want to try to make another effort like that. And it certainly hasn't been the case. It's not like they did another round of candidates after 2018, right? I mean, I guess they did. They did Amy VA. Wasn't there another? Maybe there was another round.
Amy ran again. Corey ran again and won. And then Jamal Bowman. And then after that, they were just like, we're not running candidates or something like that. They were losing funding. I think that was a part of it. Yeah.
I wonder why. I wonder why, you know.
So there's a lot of things that are happening. And I'm just like, I don't know, like you were a part of like the RBN General Strike Summit that we had a couple years ago. And I'm starting to hear people bring this up again, General Strike. And I don't know, maybe when we had the summit back then, people were just like, what are they talking about? It scared some people for whatever reason. Yeah, just looking at things the way they are now, the economy, the grocery store prices, like as you mentioned earlier, I keep seeing articles about Gen Z and also some millennials not being able to afford a home. Like these things are not improving. So it's just, to me, I don't know. I feel like the system itself has to be dismantled. Otherwise, we'll continue to run into these issues.
Yeah, this came up. Why did this come up? I think it maybe came up with the Do Dissidents guys on the show the other day, the General Strike Summit, and I think it also came up with Chris Smalls recently. I was very unsettled by the response to that summit at the time. You know, you remember, it felt people in the institutional left framed it as, look at these dum-dums who think that we're going to have a general strike tomorrow. When what it was an aggregation of, you know, union members, union leaders talking about prospectively what a general strike is and how one would build one. And the negativity around the idea of a general strike, frankly, still strikes me as like very curious. It felt like very like op-like. And I don't know if it was an effort to like just delegitimize a channel or to delegitimize the idea of the strike itself. I mean, at the time, it was exciting to me because I had, I don't come from any kind of labor background. I was an attorney, and I never really heard the idea of a general strike discussed. And it struck me as useful that more people would understand that this was a tool at their disposal, a mechanism on offer for bringing the economy to the heel at a time of enormous urgency. Again, we were at the beginning of the pandemic back then. And for a left content creator's reaction to be, this is silly, and to still not have spent the last 4 years ever really mentioning a general strike, they'll barely want to talk about any kind of striking because, it's this circular, listen to it, it's a pattern. And the pattern has become suspicious to me over the years. If you bring up any kind of labor action, then there's a conversation. It's labor is super important, and the only forward progress on the left is going to come through union strikes. Okay. Then the next move is, but union density is too low, and therefore we shouldn't talk about doing any strikes. Okay. So then it's, well, we need to elect more AOCs so we have a better NLRB so that there can be better conditions for growing labor. And like, that's the, oh, but it's not there yet. So don't talk about a general strike. Don't talk about any striking. And then every year labor union density goes lower. We're told that because Joe Biden was like the best president for labor in our lifetimes, that was going to have some effect. It didn't. And he quashed what could have been an incredibly meaningful display of labor power in the rail strike. And we go round and round and round, and all arrows point back to electing more AOCs and reinvesting in the Democratic Party. And I'm very suspicious of it. I'm sorry. They will paint you as anti-labor and unserious if you say this, but I'm sorry. It is a very suspicious redirect you get. And if you get more serious about labor and striking and say, yeah, let's talk about a general strike. No, it's not the time. It's not the time. Let's talk about AOC for president. Let's talk about Kamala and Pete Buttigieg on a ticket.
Yeah. I'll be honest with you. My opinion from all of it was it felt like a lot of gatekeeping. One of the things we were told is that we didn't go through the proper channels.
What does that mean to you, Sabby? What do you think that means?
That an idea couldn't just be presented by us. It had to come from, I'm assuming what people were saying is that it had to come from the legacy left. And then we were to follow along with it. But we couldn't just come and present an idea. I also think the fact that it wasn't all Black network also had something to do with that. I've talked about this before on the show before, the experience that I've had with anti-Blackness in progressive spaces, in organizing spaces, and also in independent media. I think those two things combined really had a lot to do with it. I think if it would have been, and when Jink was on the show, I said to him, I said, when we do these actions like the marches for Medicare for All that went over 50 cities across the country, we need platforms like yours to promote those things. And I know that those activists, I know the organizers, they reached out to everybody. You brought people on, I brought people. I mean, it's very obvious, like, who chose to ignore it. And so it's like, it was not even just the general strike. It's these organizing outside of electoral politics, and also during a time when Democrats were in the White House. Yeah. So this whole idea that, like, how dare you try to push and organize when there's a Democrat in the White House, to me was just, it's silly, because people's conditions have not improved. People still need health care. People still need, to make a living wage. And we're seeing, the backlash. And you're just constantly seeing that we're not improving. Homelessness has increased in the United States. I just saw a woman, I was talking about this yesterday. I went to the gas station yesterday to get gas, and there was a woman that she made it to the gas station. She was asking people to help her get gas. She just wanted gas. She didn't ask you for money, because a lot of times people don't want to give people money. They're like, they're just going to take it and go buy booze with it, right? She didn't ask for money. She wasn't asking you for, I don't know, any other type. She didn't ask you to go buy her alcohol. She got to the gas station and said, can somebody please help me? I need gas in my car so I can get to such and such. And it was very obvious to me that when I looked at her car, that it was obvious that this is someone who was sleeping in their car. So nobody would help this woman, not one person. It's well lit outside. There's many of us at the gas station. Nobody would help her. So I helped her. I paid for gas. I put gas in her car. She was on E. She was able to make it at least to there. And the thing is, we never know what is going to happen tomorrow. Tomorrow's not promised to any of us, and any of us could be in that position. I've been in that position during the 2008 housing crisis, where you just hope you make it to the gas station to get whatever you can get with gas, or ask someone to help you get gas. Like, you never know when it's going to happen to you. And so I think that there seems to be a bit of comfortableness, in particular within progressive spaces, where a lot of people are in a position where they are very comfortable, and they don't really want to. I don't have to fight, so why am I going to? It's kind of like that type of mentality, and we're not going to get anywhere better as a society if we don't go around doing those things. And I said this back then, and I really do think if it was a network of 5 white people, I think it would have been applauded. I really do.
I think that the sort of response to Charlie Kirk on the left has spoken volumes about a sort of racial divide. I've noticed liberal Blacks get it. Like people who I have debates with about left politics, like Ellie Mistel at The Nation or whomever, all of the liberal Blacks get it and get the absurdity of being told that it's appropriate to value Charlie Kirk's work substantively, and to be told that they need to make an outward expression of sorrow over his death, despite his open, this isn't like an edge case, his open anti-Black racism, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim bigotry, like anti-woman, sexism, open, blatant, unrepentant, unapologetic. We're all in alignment, and for some reason, and I'm really not trying to attack people, so I will maybe not name names of the leftist, but I tweeted about this, and someone was like, no, those are liberals who are asking to apologize for to canonize Charlie Kirk, like Ezra Klein, not leftists. I was like, no, there have been leftists. I'm very purposefully saying leftists. I mean, one of them, I talked on my show, I talked about that Jacobin article, which I thought, in which Ben Burgess went out of his way to say, well, I interviewed Charlie Kirk and I thought I was treated very decently. Oh, quelle surprise, Ben. I talked to Charlie Kirk and was not treated very decently. I wonder what the difference could be. Like, I just don't understand when someone's that hateful. Like, not an edge case. Someone's that hateful. Like, wouldn't you be embarrassed, even if you did sort of like him interpersonally? Wouldn't you be kind of embarrassed to say that out loud? Like, I don't get it. I do get it. I do get it. I know they're not going to want to hear this because they're not allowed to talk about race or make accusations about people's racism or on the left. Like, I get it. I know that that's not what I'm supposed to do. But seeing how this fork in the road has emerged, I don't think that you can have that sort of like even-keeled, well, let's just respect him for what he brought to the space. He was good at argumentation, attitude toward the man, unless you're frankly indifferent to the substance of his attacks and the effect that they had on the victims of his attacks. He was actively working toward, from a political perspective, actively working toward a world where women did not have equal rights, where Muslims didn't have equal rights, where Black people didn't have equal rights under the law. He said the Civil Rights Act was a mistake. He said that, when he saw Black people in positions, in jobs, pilot, whatever, that they were there not because of any kind of merit, but by affirmative action. He was worried that the plane was going to fall out of the sky. He laughed and told a quote unquote joke that he used to tell blue-haired pro-Palestinian activists that if they were to go to Gaza, that they'd be thrown off a roof for being gay. And now you can't say that anymore because there's no roofs left. LOL, isn't genocide so funny? And actively championed the destruction of Gaza and the murder of 680,000 people whose lives were worth at least as much as Charlie Kirk's. And to turn around and then say, okay, but wasn't he good at debate? First of all, he was not. But then to try to like gild the lily, just say, if you need to say murder is bad, say murder is bad. But the choice, the urge, the compulsion to gild the lily and say, also, he was really nice to me. Yeah. And maybe Hitler was nice to Eva Braun. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, that's a good point. Good point. Bree, thank you so much for your time. I do want to shout this out because he is awesome. Jazz legend Walter Beasley. He says, thank you, Walter. He says, sisters sounding good and looking good. Thank you so much, Walter. He's awesome. I met him in person.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say.
Oh, okay, Bree, thank you so much for your time. Anything cool coming up? I think there's a Bad Faith episode for Monday.
Yes, it is. Catherine Liu is joining the show. She's a fan favorite, and she is someone who got in a little bit of hot water over some of these, like a tweet that was perceived as sort of, again, making space for Charlie Kirk. So we get into that a little bit, and that should be fun for folks for Monday, for tomorrow.
Awesome. Guys, of course, check out Bree on Bad Faith Podcast. Catherine Lewis is awesome. Bree, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's always a pleasure. Thanks, Sabby. I appreciate you.
Hey, guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.